Hello, this is Ordaned1, and this will be my anime rant that I promised a couple days ago, but I never got a chance to do it. Tonight I'm going to talk about anime past, present, and future, what I think about anime. Now, all anime fans, including you will not have to worry about illegitimacy and me flaming a certain type of anime. I'm old school anime. I'm an old school anime fan. So all anime fans, y'all gonna find this very informative. I'm from the old school type Japanese animation, so I got some good things, some good points I have to make. Alright, before I get into my rant, I would like to give everyone a short history on anime and how it became to be. Alright, anime first came to be around post-Cold War, post-World War II, shortly after the genocide of Hiroshima. The name anime is actually not a foreign word at all. Anime is not Japanese. Anime is a Japanese slang to the American word animation. So all you new gen anime fans out there, anime is not Japanese. It's just a Japanese slang for animation. Is derived from the word animation. Alright. Anime began sometime around, it is post Cold War, post World War II, so I want to say sometime around the early mid 50s. This was when this was like the birth period of animation, when animation was just beginning, and the world had already seen great wonders being worked with animation, such as Walt Disney and Warner Brothers, which produced the Looney Tunes. And animation at this certain period became very phenomenal. It was like nothing anyone had ever seen before, and animation was just hot, you know. And this was around the time Japan had suffered a great loss, for they lost a nation called Hiroshima, and it was a great grieving period for Japan, for they were trying to find new ways and to improve their culture and their way of life. And it was a Renaissance period, if you will so call it, and that's how anime became to be. And the Japanese began to perfect the art of animation, and through this, the first early anime shows came to be, and one of these is Astro Boy, which off the bat became a huge hit with Japan, a cult classic. And Astro Boy set the standards. Most people say, Astro Boy sucks, I hate Astro Boy, Astro Boy just looks ridiculous. But actually, Astro Boy led the foundation for what would soon to come for the whole anime movement period. And it was through these times that anime was at its first beginning stages. And then that's when the world began to take notice. And Astro Boy got a good contract deal with America. Astro Boy began to air in America, another cult classic, and America began to take notice in this new style of art. There wasn't an official name for it. Actually, the term anime didn't come till sometime around the 80s, there was not like no real name to it. They just call it Japanese art. There was no anime, no manga title. Well, it was being called manga because that's what it was when it first started out, but there was no anime. It was until later on. Alright, well, America began to take notice in this new trend of art, and that's when we started to see in the 60s and the 70s these shows being aired in America, such as Speed Racer and Gotcha Man and all these shows, and anime became very mainstream. And the 60s did anime some justice. Not only anime, but like the whole Japanese, the whole Asian culture, because it was in this decade that the world began to take notice in the fruitful nature of Asian culture. It wasn't until the 60s and the 70s that people began to learn exactly what martial arts really was, and people began to take notice in kung fu and martial arts and the whole tradition of the culture. And anime just became more and more mainstream. We saw over the years an increasing number of Japanese animated cartoons began to trend in through the 70s and the 80s. Especially in the 80s. The 80s was when Japanese animation was at its peak. Alright, many people say today that the animation in anime now is better than it was in the 80s, but in the 80s the animation was more developed, the characters were more developed, they looked more real than they are now. In today's time, the anime looks more cartoony than it was back then. Back then it looks real. And I say that the 80s was the peak of animation because I believe that old school anime, as far as the art, is a lot better than what it is now. So I believe it was in the 80s where anime had reached its peak. Anime had reached the best of what it could get. Although over the years, animation would get better in animation and CG, and how the cartoons look more like realistic now with the way the computer animation. But in the 80s, as far as drawing and the art, anime was at the peak. Anime was at the best it would ever get. The best anime could ever get was in the 80s. That's when we started seeing shows. That's when we started seeing anime such as Akira and Fist of the North Star and Ninja Scroll, and one of these shows that became mainstream, and the world began to take huge notice, and most of these shows spawned into their own movies, such as Fist of the North Star, which Fist of the North Star wasn't that good, but point I'm trying to make, that it grew and it grew and it grew, and especially in the early 90s, as far as popularity wise. Now, as far as quality wise, the mid 80s was the best anime could ever get. That's when you started seeing shows like Dragon Ball in the 80s. All these great shows. You don't see too many of these shows like this in today's time.